Now, you might notice that we use an acronym there, RADICAL. Let me tell you why we have chosen to use RADICAL. In the Old Latin, the word radicalis means back to the roots. I believe with all of my heart that the roots of great leadership is healthy relationships. That's the roots. In the modern vernacular, radical has come to mean out on the very leading edge of change. Now stop and think for a moment. Those two are in conflict with each other. Healthy relationships and dynamic change are often in conflict with each other. There's a tension between those two. I believe that great leadership resides in the constructive tension between healthy relationships and dynamic change. If you are so focused on healthy relationships, if you're so focused on the relationships that you don't ever take people out of their comfort zones, you're going to die a slow death. If you are so focused on change that you don't bring the team along, you're going to die a fast death. But death is the outcome in both cases. Great leadership resides in the constructive tension between those two. Think about a guitar string. Beautiful music only happens in the constructive tension of a guitar string being stretched between two posts, two polar opposites. If there is no tension, there is no music. You cannot be a great leader without simultaneously having healthy relationships and dynamic change in a VUCA world. If you are not constantly, aggressively, and rapidly moving forward, you are falling behind. And this creates all sorts of tensions in your organizations. It creates all sorts of anxiety. I am convinced that servant leadership actually provides the right value system to be a great leader in this VUCA world. Now, what is servant leadership? Let me give you some quick insights. The phrase servant leadership actually came out of a little monograph. It really wasn't even a full book, written by a guy named Robert Greenleaf in 1970. And his essay was The Servant as Leader. And he was an executive at AT&T, and he had taken and had studied leaders. And what he discovered was that the greatest leaders were characterized by a number of characteristics. Now, he didn't articulate them quite this distinctly, but later, the executive director of the Greenleaf Institute, which is in Atlanta, took and dissected a lot of Greenleaf's work, and he identified these 12 characteristics. Listening, empathy, healing, nurturing the spirit, building community, awareness, foresight, conceptualization, persuasion, calling, stewardship, and committed to the growth of people. Now, here's what's interesting and was a great aha moment to me about that list. Look at the first 5. All of those are actually about nurturing healthy and trusting relationships. Look at the next 6, and they're all about leading innovative change into the future. Now, some of you who are in your box are going to look at the one called stewardship, and you're going to go, that doesn't have anything to do with change management or leading change or the future. And I would tell you it has everything to do with it. I would tell you that the people who are the least focused on stewardship are the ones who are the most focused on the short term. You cannot be a good steward focusing on the here and now. The essence of stewardship is long-term in scope and concept. And then notice the 12th is committed to the growth of people, and that's really sort of the bridge between the two. So on the one end, what you've got is nurturing and trusting healthy relationships, and on the other end, you've got how do we lead innovative change into the future, and the real strategy for both of those is growing your people. The real strategy for how you do it is recruiting, assessing, and developing leaders. If you're not investing in recruiting, assessing, and developing leaders, you are not doing your job as a leader. You're not doing your primary job as a leader. And when we talk about trust, those of you who were here last year, Mike Armour spoke. And Mike had spent his career as a minister and then became a corporate executive coach and started to do well financially, very different than his life as a minister. And so Mike tells the story of deciding he had always wanted a Mercedes. And so he goes out and buys himself a used Mercedes. And then what happened was he was invited to speak at a conference in California, and he decided to drive so he could just see how fast this top flight car would go. So he takes off and he's out in the middle of Nevada. And there's miles and miles of miles and miles. He can see forever. And he takes that car and he is, he's up to 85 and then 90 and then 95 and then 100 and then 105 and 110, 120. He crosses 130 towards 135. The tachometer is still, it's just barely there. Engine is not straining at all. It is just beautiful. Engine's just as smooth as can be. And just before he bumps 135, it occurs to him that while his engine was rated for 190, his tires were rated for 95. So what happened? He immediately slowed down the whole engine. He dummied down the entire vehicle to the lowest common trust denominator. Organizations do the same thing. Your team will not function at a higher level than its lowest common trust denominator. This is not small stuff. This is not sit in a circle and hum kumbaya stuff. This is the core of whether you control your destiny or not as an organization. The level of trust that you create in your team determines the ability to control your destiny in leading dynamic change towards the future.